So just want to thank everybody for joining today. My name is Wayne. I'm a member of the PhenX team. We've got several other members of the PhenX team on the call today as well, including Tabitha Hendershot, Carol Hamilton, who is the PI for PhenX, Elizabeth Fallon, Michelle Krasnowski, and David Williams. Just some, let's see here. Let me organize my windows. Just some housekeeping reminders. So please mute your microphone when not speaking. If you do have questions, please feel free to either use the chat, or raise your hand. I may not see it, but I think Tabitha and Elizabeth will be monitoring chat and will let me know if anybody has a question. And we can also sort of stop along the way to see if there are questions. We're also recording this meeting. We're going to post this workshop, like we've posted all of these workshops, on the PhenX Toolkit, and you'll be able to access those from the menu to get to our YouTube page. So the goals for today are to give a brief introduction to PhenX, including the importance of standard measures and a little bit about the process for how protocols get into Toolkit. And then we're going to dive into some of the features that support interoperability when using PhenX protocols. And so the introduction is going to be somewhat brief. But this builds on content from other workshops in this series, which you can access and review. You can also ask questions if you need more information. And at the very end, we'll share information about how to access the workshops and upcoming workshops. So diving into some of the background on PhenX. So PhenX stands for Consensus Measures for Phenotypes and Exposures. The goal is to provide the community with recommended protocols for collecting data and human participants. And the idea is that these protocols can establish a common currency for sharing data across different studies. The PhenX Toolkit is driven by the scientific community. The steering committee provides the overarching guidance, including deciding which domains are addressed. For each domain, the steering committee prioritizes. We establish a working group to select protocols for the toolkit using a consensus process that relies on feedback and input from the community. We also have what are called content expert panels, which review existing toolkit content to make sure it's still relevant. And like the working groups, the content expert panels follow a consensus process, which also relies on community input. And then we have liaisons from the various NIH institute centers and programs so that we can have ongoing communication with them to make sure that the toolkit is meeting the needs of their research communities. So PhenX is funded primarily by the National Human Genome Research Institute. They have provided continuous funding since 2007. Our project scientist is Jyoti Dayal. Over the years, we have enjoyed additional support from the list of from other NIH institutes and centers, and you can see the list here. And this includes current or prior co-funding or supplemental funding. So a little bit about why standard protocols are important. So from the investigator side or the researcher side, using the same protocol across different studies can make it easier to combine and compare data downstream. And so we tend to think of PhenX protocols as potentially avoiding some of the stickier issues with harmonization. But using the same method to collect data can make it easier to combine data across studies to do things like increase statistical power, do follow-on validation or replication studies, and including some standard protocols can increase the impact of individual studies because it can make your data more compatible with other studies that also use PhenX protocols. From the NIH perspective, standard protocols can help ensure that data that's collected is fair. It can also help address the increased emphasis on reproducible results and the expectations around data sharing. And there have been more than 700 funding opportunity announcements that recommend the use of PhenX protocols. So including PhenX protocols can help your applications be more responsive. So sort of PhenX in a nutshell, what PhenX is and isn't. So first and foremost, we're a catalog of recommended measurement protocols. But there's a lot of additional information to help investigators implement the protocols in their studies. What it's not. So what we don't do, so PhenX is not a new set of methods. As you'll see in just a second, we don't develop new questionnaires or protocols. We're not developing an ontology of phenotypes and exposures. We're not developing new standards, although we're going to talk about some of the standards that we link to. We're not a data repository, although we do have a collaboration with some data repositories, and it's not proprietary. So there's no cost to use the toolkit. So this is the PhenX conceptual diagram. And this gives an overview of how some of the terminology that we'll be using relates to one another. You can find this diagram from the PhenX Toolkit homepage. It's under the About tab. And you can, from there, you can see it will include some definitions as well as this, this diagram. What we're mostly going to be talking about today are protocols, which are here in the middle. And protocol is a term that can cause confusion. For a lot of people, protocol means sort of the entire study design for a clinical trial or for an observational study. When we talk about protocols in PhenX, we're really talking about a specific method to collect a specific piece of data. So, for example, a questionnaire or a method for a bioassay. Okay. I want to briefly talk about criteria for selecting protocols for the toolkit. These criteria were established by our steering committee, and they are used by both the working groups and content expert panels when they're selecting protocols for the toolkit. So the first one is that a standard protocol must already exist. So the working groups are not allowed to develop new questionnaires, new methods. We ask them to choose from what's already in the field. Additionally, we're looking for protocols that are well established. This can mean broadly validated or being used in a major reference study. So some of the larger national studies like NHANES, for example. Whenever possible, we're looking for protocols that are low burden to participants and investigators. We want these to be accessible and not require a lot of time to complete, for example, or require a lot of instrumentation. We prefer those that can, those protocols that are can be used across different population groups. And we have a preference for non-proprietary instruments whenever possible. And prior use in omics research were funded by NHGRI. So this can be an important consideration depending on the research topic. All right, so this is just a screenshot of the Toolkit homepage, just for your reference. And also just to remind me that we're going to sort of transition here from talking about background on PhenX to diving into some of the data interoperability features that we have. And this may actually be a good time just to stop and see if there are any questions, sort of on PhenX or the consensus process or anything we've covered. And I'm guessing I don't, Tabitha or Elizabeth, you'd let me know if there's something in chat.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, we will keep moving then. Okay. So data interoperability. So just in broad terms, this refers to the ability of different systems to both exchange and interpret data, typically computationally. So different computer systems. And this can be, data interoperability can be facilitated by applying standards to your data. There are a lot of different types of standards, but typically I think of them as sort of falling into one of two groups. Some standards, and they can be both of these. But one way standards can help is by organizing data in a predictable way. So, for example, establishing a standard file format that makes it easier for a computer program to access the data or read the data in. Standards can also provide alphanumeric codes, which can be linked to a definition, so that the data can be interpreted and understood once it's been accessed and moved around. And no one standard really does everything altogether. So some standards are better at standard formats. Some standards are better at providing meaning and interpretation. And oftentimes, different groups, different research areas will favor one standard over another. So there's no one definitive solution that we've sort of embraced. In terms of utility, when we're thinking about these standards and some of these other resources, what we're trying to do is ensure that data that's collected with PhenX protocols is sufficiently organized and annotated so it can be found and understood by investigators who didn't generate the data. And so we're thinking about a variety of use cases where people might use PhenX protocols and looking at standards which may be applicable here. So for example, electronic health records or EHRs, research studies like clinical trials or observational studies, and even data that's living in repositories. And the goal of all this, of course, is to promote data reuse, so that, which can support things like doing reproducibility studies, combining studies to increase sample size, or repurposing data to ask new questions. So we showed this slide a lot. This is sort of a list of a compiled list of all the different biomedical standards, ontologies, and related resources that are associated either with the toolkit or with PhenX protocols. We're going to focus just on a handful of these, in particular, the ones that are denoted with the asterisk. So standards, common data elements, and a repository. And when we're sort of looking through these, we're not trying to solve all of the issues around data interoperability. We're really focusing on a few things here. So one is helping people tag data that's been collected by a PhenX protocol so it can be found and reused. And there are a couple of different ways we can think about tagging data that's been collected with the PhenX protocol. Some standards are really good at representing the protocol or the questionnaire itself. And we'll see some of this. And the other way to sort of go about it is to actually tag the data that's been collected with a code that provides meaning, for example. So somebody has diabetes or is depressed. We're also looking at some standard formats so that PhenX protocols and the associated metadata can be shared electronically. This could be helpful, for example, providing additional context about collected data. You know, for example, did the data include all of the questions in the PhenX protocol? It can provide information about the types of instructions that were given to respondents, skip patterns, and scoring instructions. And then we're also looking at whether or not we can standardize the data at the point of data collection. And this could help improve data consistency and organize the data and annotate the data to make it easier to submit to repositories. So I'm going to walk through some standards that are associated with some PhenX protocols using an example. So this is the food insecurity protocol from the PhenX Toolkit. And this is the landing page. So if you search for food insecurity, it should take you to a page, this page. So we've got some tabs here along the top, which you can use to browse different information associated with the protocol. We're currently looking at the protocol view. And so we can see that this is the 6-item standard measure from the USDA Economic Research Service. There are some introductory instructions and context that are given to the respondent. And then we can see that here's question 1 and the answer responses. The standards that are associated with food insecurity can be found on the details tab. So I've just gone from the protocols tab to the details tab. And for food insecurity, we have 3 different standards that are associated with this. So we have LOINC codes, SNOMED codes, and codes from CADSR CDEs. And these are actually links out from the toolkit. So we don't reproduce all of the standards in the toolkit. So if you follow one of these links, it will take you to the landing page at LOINC or SNOMED, for example, where you can see more detail. So we'll talk a little bit about LOINC first. So LOINC stands for Logical Observation, Identifiers, Names, and Codes. LOINC is a well-established standard that is primarily used in electronic health records and messages between clinical systems. There are LOINC codes for a good subset of PhenX protocols. And LOINC codes are kind of a natural fit for PhenX because what LOINC is really good at is representing the bioassays and questionnaires that have been performed on somebody. And so we see that we'll see in a minute that the LOINC codes the LOINC codes are at the level of really represent the protocol, the questions, and the answers. Okay, so if you follow the link from the food insecurity page, it will take you to the landing page in LOINC where you can see more details. And that's what this is. So just want to point out that what we're looking at here is that there is a unique code associated with the entire protocol and then with each individual question. And if you drill down in this, you'll see that there are actually unique codes that are associated with the answer responses. But the point is that LOINC codes are very unique and specific. And so you can use these codes to aggregate patients or participants who have data for this questionnaire. So for example, I could search across using this LOINC code 95249-9 and potentially find all participants or patients who have data for this question. And just want to pause for a minute to give credit to the Gravity project. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Gravity. Gravity has done a lot of work to establish standards for social determinants of health. And we've had sort of a collaboration with them, but they've spearheaded the development of a lot of these standards for SDOH. One of the other standards we saw was a SNOMED CT term. And so SNOMED stands for Systematized Nomenclature of Medicine Clinical Terms. Like LOINC, SNOMED is a standard that's primarily used in electronic health records. Of course, both of these can be used in other contexts. But where LOINC really focuses on the method, representing the method that was used to collect the data, SNOMED is more focused on representing the results of that data. So for example, you might have a very specific LOINC code that says this patient or this participant had a fasting plasma glucose assay that was done with this method, and the results have these units. And then there will be a SNOMED code associated with it that interprets that test. So for example, whether or not the patient has diabetes. So PhenX is not as well represented in SNOMED. We're primarily, of course, concerned with representing the protocols, the questionnaires. But there has been LOINC and SNOMED have recently established a collaboration to map equivalent terms between these two systems. The first release was actually this month. And our hope is that this will actually get PhenX into SNOMED. So we may be able to use more SNOMED codes going forward. And then just to give you an example, so this is following the link from the Food Insecurity homepage. Just want to highlight this just briefly to point out that while the LOINC code was really really was representing the questions and answers, the food insecurity code really represents the interpretation. And so you can see here that there are SNOMED codes for mild food insecurity, moderate food insecurity, and severe food insecurity. And again, this is another way of potentially identifying data that's been collected by a PhenX protocol. So the next thing I want to mention are some common data elements. So there was a link to a CADSR form also on that food insecurity page. Common data elements or CDEs in terms of definitions. So there are a couple of different concepts here in a common data element. So in terms of the data element portion, a CDE represents an individual research question and its allowed responses. And oftentimes these are associated with additional metadata and semantic standards. The common part of CDE refers to the fact that these are often defined and used the same way across multiple studies to provide a basis for data sharing. There are two main CDE resources at NIH. So there's the National Cancer Institute Cancer Data Standards Registry and Repository, or NCI-CADSR. We've had a long-standing collaboration with NCI-CADSR, and PhenX protocols are better represented in this resource. The other one, of course, is the NIH CDE repository. This one's a more recent. And And we do have some coverage in the CDE repository, and we're working on getting more PhenX protocols into that resource. Like LOINC codes, CDEs are really geared toward representing the questions and the answers, as opposed to the interpretation. And they have a slightly different use case. They appear to primarily be used more in research, so in clinical trials and epidemiology studies. Of course, that's not hard and fast. They can be used in EHRs, and of course, LOINC and SNOMED can be used in research. So this is just showing the landing page with additional details about the CDEs, the NCI CADSR CDEs for food insecurity. So this is one way of viewing it at their landing page. You can see there's a code associated with the questions. And then you can also get this nice form from NCI CADSR, which potentially can be helpful for collecting data. Okay, I'm going to shift. Well, maybe this might be a good place just to stop and see if there are any questions. All right. So shifting gears just a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about our collaboration with the Database of Genotypes and Phenotypes, or dbGaP. And dbGaP is a NIH repository that stores NIH-funded genomics-based research studies, as well as other study types. We've had a collaboration with dbGaP probably since 2009 or 2010. And one of the things we've been doing with them is to identify variables in dbGaP studies that are comparable or equivalent to variables that are in PhenX protocols. And the idea here is to help PhenX users find data that can be combined with PhenX protocols. A side effect of this is that a lot of times these linkages or these mappings are shared across several different dbGaP studies. And so they've identified sort of a subset of CDEs across studies in dbGaP. We're going to move away from food insecurity to talk to a different protocol, only because the food insecurity protocol hasn't yet been mapped into dbGaP.
Hey, Wayne, really quick.
Yeah.
Got a question in the chat from Tess.
Sure.
Can you discuss briefly what PhenX protocols are? What if data were not collected using PhenX protocols?
Is that in the chat?
Yep. So what if data were not collected using PhenX protocols?
So, of course, we're primarily concerned with, use of PhenX protocols, but these standards can be used with other methods. LOINC in particular, and common data elements in particular, are not exclusive to PhenX. So they do have representations of other types of other instruments, other methods, other questionnaires that they have created standards for. Does that answer the question? Did I misunderstand?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And so what PhenX, and I can see the chat now. So you're also asking what PhenX protocols are. So it's kind of an interesting question. So we do not develop, PhenX does not develop new protocols. So we ask working groups to identify protocols that are already in use in the field, well established, and then we add them to the PhenX toolkit. So a good example of that may be, so we're looking at the PhenX protocol for emotional distress here. And this is actually a protocol that was developed by PROMIS, or the Patient Reported Outcomes Measurement Information System. So in one way of thinking about it is just that a PhenX protocol is something that's already out there, been developed by somebody else, and a working group is recommending that this be the way investigators collect emotional distress, for example. And please, if you have additional questions, please do put them in the chat. Like I said, this is the emotional distress protocol in PhenX. This is a PROMIS protocol. If you look at the protocol here, you can actually see links to that, and the source will cite where we found it from. But we're looking at the variables tab, and this lists all the different variables that are in this protocol. And if there is a dbGaP mapping for these, it will appear here in this last column. So there are mapped variables in dbGaP for in the past 7 days I felt depressed, and in the past 7 days I felt fearful. And if you click these are links, it will give you that list of variables from dbGaP that have been mapped or linked. And so you can see that there are a series of longitudinal variables, both from the Framingham cohort and from the Mesa cohort. And again, these are also links. So if you follow these links, it will either take you to the study landing page at dbGaP or the variable landing page at dbGaP. And so I'm just showing the variable landing page for one of the Mesa variables. And here at the bottom, you can see the variable description. So I felt depressed past week. And the PhenX variable linkage is here at the bottom, as well as the LOINC code. So as part of this, if we have LOINC codes for a PhenX protocol, when we these are also shared on the dbGaP landing page. And then if you click on these links, it will also show you all the other variables in dbGaP that map to this same term. Again, sort of identifying common data elements. So if you want to see all of the PhenX dbGaP mappings, these are available on the dbGaP Advanced Search page. So what I'm showing here is at the very bottom, here are the filters where you can select the PhenX linkages and the LOINC terms. And I've selected the PhenX linkages, and this is listing. You can see there are about 15,000 of these variables at dbGaP that have been linked to PhenX variables. Often, they've also been annotated with the LOINC code. So the last standard I want to mention is Health Level 7 International Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, or HL7 FHIR. This was not, these are not yet in the toolkit. This is something we're working on. But FHIR is a standard for exchanging data primarily among electronic health records. And so it's sort of a standard format, a standard way of organizing data. There are two main components of FHIR. There are FHIR resources, which represent categories of healthcare data. So for example, patients, there's a patient resource, medications resource, and there's a questionnaire resource, which is what we're interested in. And then FHIR specifies an application programming interface, which enables people to query between systems and access these resources. Let's see. So the way we are thinking about FHIR is that FHIR may provide a way to sort of bundle all of these different standards, metadata, and context with PhenX protocols that can be shared electronically. Is there a question? Carolina?
No, sorry, I just pressed the wrong button.
Oh, no.
So you're doing
Okay.
great. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. So one of the reasons, so we're interested in FHIR for a couple of reasons. One is that we think this will give us the ability to package up all the standards and contexts in a form that's electronically available. And so that, and this may be helpful, for example, so that people can ask questions about, did somebody use all the, did somebody use all the questions in a PhenX protocol? It may be a way to provide the supporting documentation, so like supporting instructions that were given to the respondent, and scoring instructions and skip patterns, as well as, standards. The other thing that FHIR may provide is the ability to associate data collected with PhenX protocols as it's being collected. So this is a feature, a tool that's built by the National Library of Medicine. This is the NLM Form Builder, which can be used to build HL7 FHIR questionnaires. What I'm showing here is that I'm asking this to build a questionnaire based on the LOINC codes for this food insecurity survey. And what this does is it gives me, this is just a test environment, but it gives me a rendered questionnaire that can be used to collect data, potentially in a patient portal or in another online context. And what's not being shown here, but is sort of interesting, is that in the background, these questions are associated with the unique LOINC codes, and the collected data would also be associated with these LOINC codes. And so this would be a way to, and so any of the data would also be automatically associated with the LOINC codes and also be formatted according to the FHIR standard. We're interested in this. This is just showing the LOINC codes, but we think from the PhenX perspective, we could include common data elements, SNOMED codes, dbGaP mapping, the source of the protocol, things to provide extra context. And this could travel with the data, which could help with data consistency and submission to data repositories. So just to summarize, we're talking today about associating PhenX protocols with different standards and resources to improve data interoperability. We hope this will improve data consistency, make it easier to start studies and submit standardized data to repositories. We help these codes and resources will help users find comparable data across different designs and topics, which can in turn be used to aggregate data for secondary analysis. And potentially all of this may be able to be done with computational workflows or semi-computational workflows to take some of the manual labor out of this. Anybody who's sort of done this kind of work on their own sort of knows how tedious this can be. Okay, so just want to briefly mention the additional workshops that we're doing and are going to do. So you can access these from the PhenX Toolkit homepage under the News tab. So you can find a link to the workshops that we've already done that'll take you to the YouTube landing page. And then it will also announce new workshops here as well. I think they'll also be available in the banner on the Toolkit homepage. But the next one we have is next month on the COVID-19 library and collections, and you can register from it there. And I think Tabitha is putting some links in the chat. And this is just a screenshot of our YouTube page. So it includes not only the workshops, but other tutorials for using the PhenX toolkit. I just want to end with some acknowledgements. Of course, we want to acknowledge our funders, including Jody Dial, Alana Rupert, Aaron Ramos, and Terry Manolio. Our steering committee is chaired by Mara Marizita. All of the working group members and content expert panel members, there have been probably more than 500 of these over the years. Our IC liaisons, and of course, the leads for the different PhenX supplements. And then just the RTI team, the PhenX team, of course. This is just, the team is actually much bigger than this, but these are a lot of the people who make the toolkit run, and some of these people are on the call today. And with that, I think that's my last slide. So if there are any questions or comments, would happy to take them. Well, if there are no questions, just want to thank everybody again for joining today. We'll post this on our YouTube site and on the toolkit. And please join us next month to learn more about the COVID-19 library.